They thought they could take what wasn't theirs. As I stood there, the eviction notice crumpled in my hand. I couldn't believe it. The arrogance of it all. It hit me like a punch to the gut. The audacity of these people to try to steal my family's land, all while I was overseas serving my country. I slid the 1923 water rights deed across the table, my fingers cold as I looked straight into their eyes. "You're about to find out just how wrong you are," I said, voice steady but laced with fury. I watched as their faces turned pale, the realization sinking in. In that moment, everything I had fought for, everything my grandfather had fought for, wasn't just about to slip through my fingers. It was about to be ripped away. But they didn't know what I knew. They didn't know that I wasn't about to let them get away with it. Before I dive into how I got here, make sure you hit that like button, subscribe to the channel, and share this story with anyone who's ever been pushed too far by corrupt forces. Trust me, you don't want to miss what happens next. Let me introduce myself. My name's Ryan Carson. I'm a 34-year-old Army Corps of Engineers veteran, and for as long as I can remember, I've been tied to this piece of land, 47 acres of it, just outside of Austin, Texas. It wasn't just land to me. It was home. It was where my grandfather, Jack, built everything from the ground up. The place where my father learned to love the land before passing it to me. It was where I grew up. It was everything. Grandpa Jack bought the land back in 1955 when Austin was still that small college town with barbecue joints on every corner. The property was surrounded by rolling hills, a place that could have been anywhere else, but it was ours. Jack wasn't just a man of the land. He was a man of family. He believed that the land could provide for those who treated it right, and he did exactly that. In 1978, Jack had a small earth dam built on the property. Nothing extravagant, just practical. It wasn't just to water our cattle. It was there to serve the people who lived nearby. My grandfather believed in looking out for others, especially when the Texas droughts hit. The dam was built with the Army Corps of Engineers' help. It wasn't just a feature on the property. It was a lifeline for us, our neighbors, and every farmer downstream. Grandpa always said the dam was meant to help out when people needed it most, whether during floods or droughts. And for the next 45 years, that's exactly what it did. But while I was out serving my country, I never expected this kind of betrayal. I deployed twice to Afghanistan, working on water management and infrastructure in one of the harshest environments imaginable. In a place where every drop of water could mean the difference between life and death, I learned the importance of water and the damage that can be done when people think they can control it for their own gain. That's when the call came. Grandpa Jack had passed. My sister Lily, who lives in California, called me. I didn't get to say goodbye to him. The land that Jack had worked so hard to protect now fell into her hands. Hands that didn't understand the value of what we had. Lily hired a property management company called Lonia Land Services to look after the taxes and general upkeep. I trusted Lily, but she never looked at the tax assessments. I figured everything would be fine. But the truth is, I never thought I'd come back to find out how wrong I was. It was August 2023 when I returned home. I was excited to finally be back on the land, to spend some real time here, to breathe in the air that reminded me of my childhood. I drove down that familiar gravel road, past the old oak tree where I'd carved my initials as a kid. I expected to see the same view, the rolling pastures, the dam sparkling in the sunlight, everything exactly how I'd left it. But that wasn't what I found. Instead, I found construction crews, bulldozers, and survey stakes scattered across the back 40 acres. They had marked up the land as though it was theirs. The crunch of gravel under my boots sounded different now, angrier. The taste of dust filled my mouth as I marched up to the foreman. I didn't even think twice. "What the hell is this?" I asked. He didn't even look up. "Sorry, buddy," he said flatly. "We've got permits for this. This is Willowbrook property now." I was in shock, disbelief. How could this be happening? They were building a whole neighborhood on land. I'd grown up on. I called the police, but by the time Officer Williams arrived, I was already fuming. He explained with obvious discomfort that the HOA had filed an adverse possession claim while I was deployed. Apparently, if no one actively uses land for a while and the new owners improve it, they can legally claim it as theirs. That's when I met her, Maggie Fields, the president of the Willowbrook Estates HOA. Maggie showed up in her golf cart, a big smile on her face, acting like she was doing me a favor. She's the type of person who wears tennis outfits to meetings and thinks it's business attire. She said to me, in that syrupy, sweet tone, "Your family abandoned this land, Ryan. We're just putting it to good use for the community." But it didn't stop there. It got worse. The HOA wasn't just stealing my land. They were stealing my water. The creek that fed the dam was being diverted. My grandfather's careful management of the land and the water was being destroyed. Every day I watched the water level drop. The dam that had been the lifeline for decades was slipping away, and all I could do was watch it happen. I couldn't just stand by and let it happen, so I did what I had to do. I hired a lawyer, but quickly found out that even if I could afford to fight, the law wasn't on my side. $85,000 just to challenge the zoning change? That wasn't a fight I could afford, not when they had the entire city council and a development project behind them. But I had one thing they didn't. I had something the developers hadn't counted on, the truth. I dove into the county records like a man on a mission, determined to find anything that could help. That's when I found it. The original water rights deed from 1923, signed and sealed by my great-grandfather, guaranteeing my family the rights to the water that flowed through Willow Creek. And then I uncovered something even better. The original dam construction permits from 1978, where the Army Corps of Engineers had given Jack the green light to build the dam. Federal jurisdiction. I had them. All of a sudden, the fight wasn't just a legal battle. It was about something much bigger than that. It was a fight about preserving my family's legacy, about making sure that what my grandfather had built didn't get bulldozed by a bunch of greedy developers who didn't care about the people who had been here long before them. But Maggie and her HOA weren't going to give up that easily. And this wasn't just about land or water. This was about a woman who was willing to do anything to take what wasn't hers. But I wasn't about to let her get away with it. This wasn't just a property dispute anymore. It was war. And Maggie Fields was about to find out that messing with the wrong man would be the biggest mistake of her life. I had a plan, and it was time to take action. The question was, would I get the justice I needed before she took everything from me? The moment I discovered the truth about the land, the game changed. No longer was I just a man fighting for property. Now I was a man fighting for a legacy, for my grandfather's legacy, for my family. The battle had only just begun. Maggie. Fields and the Willowbrook Estates HOA didn't back down, though. They had too much power, too much money behind them, and they weren't going to let me or anyone get in their way. Maggie's husband, Rick Fields, was a city councilman, and let me tell you, these people knew how to work the system. They had the zoning laws rigged in their favor, and the moment I tried to push back, it became clear. This wasn't going to be a fair fight. The first lawyer I hired was a mistake. I paid him a small fortune, and all he did was send a few letters. When I got the bill for $85,000, I realized that money wasn't going to fix this. I needed something more than legal advice. I needed a plan, a real one. I started digging, using every tool I could think of, old land records, county archives, anything that could give me leverage. And that's when I found it, the deed to the water rights. My great-grandfather had secured the senior water rights to Willow Creek back in 1923. That document was my golden ticket. Those water rights were older than the city of Austin itself. They were untouchable, and I had them in my hands. But Maggie wasn't going to make it that easy. She and her HOA used their connections to push through an emergency zoning change. Just like that, the land I had inherited, my grandfather's hard work, was rezoned for residential development. They had essentially stolen it, And the worst part was, they knew they had the legal upper hand. And they were ruthless. Maggie had a knack for playing the victim. She had the perfect face for it, those big doe eyes, that sugar-sweet voice. But make no mistake, she was a wolf in sheep's clothing. She had orchestrated an entire media campaign, making me out to be the villain. She used the local news to twist the narrative, portraying me as an unstable veteran who didn't know what he was doing. She went on TV, with her hair perfectly styled and a tissue in hand, talking about how dangerous my dam was. "We're just trying to protect our children," she said, her voice trembling as if she were the one being attacked. I could see it. The plan, the carefully constructed image. It was all about control, and Maggie was playing the game like a pro. But they didn't know who they were dealing with. I wasn't just any vet. I was an Army Corps engineer. I knew how to fight, and I wasn't going down without a battle. That's when I called in Tony Riggs. Tony was one of my old buddies from the Army, and he'd gone on to work with the EPA. I knew he'd have the inside track on how to handle the legal mess I was facing. After a quick phone call, Tony was on my side, ready to help. He told me something I hadn't realized, something that made my blood run cold. "Ryan, if they've diverted the creek without the right permits, that's a Clean Water Act violation," he said. "And if your dam was built with federal oversight, it's under federal jurisdiction. This isn't just about local zoning. This is a federal case." That was the key. My grandfather's dam wasn't just a structure on our land. It was part of a larger federal project designed to control water flow and help the community during droughts. Maggie and her crew had no idea what they were messing with. This was bigger than anything they could have imagined. But that didn't stop them. Maggie, sensing I was getting too close, stepped up her harassment campaign. She started sending out HOA members to monitor my property. She had her little tennis-clad cronies ride around in golf carts, taking pictures of my house, my property, anything they could use against me. It felt like I was living in a surveillance state, where I couldn't even take a walk without being watched. That's when things really started to escalate. The first signs of trouble came when I noticed that the construction crews had started working double shifts, racing to finish the homes before I could get any legal injunctions. I was running out of time, but I wasn't about to let them win. They thought they could push me out, but they didn't understand the real fight. Every night, as I watched the crews continue their work, I felt the weight of it all. The water level in my dam was dropping, day by day, inch by inch. I couldn't stand to see it. The thought of my grandfather's dam, the one that had been so carefully built, being rendered useless, it hit me like a gut punch. I couldn't let that happen. I had to fight, not just for my family's land, but for the community my grandfather had helped build. I started documenting everything. I set up trail cameras around the perimeter of my property. I took photographs of every new construction project, every diversion of the creek, and made sure I kept precise measurements of the water flow. But it wasn't just about taking pictures. I was preparing for something bigger. I couldn't fight this battle with just a lawyer and a few angry words. I needed to hit them where it hurt, legally, financially, and strategically. That's when I found out the full extent of Maggie's corruption. It wasn't just about my land. It was about how she had manipulated the system to take land from other people too. She was systematically pushing out families and small farmers, using zoning laws and other shady tactics to build her perfect little suburban utopia. And that's when I realized this wasn't just a personal fight. Maggie wasn't just trying to steal from me. She was trying to bulldoze an entire community, all to make her little corner of the world more profitable. The time for playing by the rules was over. Maggie thought she could use her power and connections to crush me. But what she didn't know was that I had something much stronger than money and influence. I had truth on my side, and it was time to take the gloves off. The real battle was about to begin, and Maggie wasn't going to know what hit her. By now it was clear. I wasn't just battling for land or water rights. I was up against an entire system, one that had been carefully designed to protect people like Maggie Fields and her wealthy neighbors. They had power, connections, and money, but I had something they never expected. I had the truth. And with that truth, I was about to take the fight to them. Maggie had pushed me to the edge. She was playing every trick in the book: harassment, legal maneuvering, media manipulation. I could feel the weight of it all pressing down on me. I wasn't just fighting for my property anymore. I was fighting for my family's honor and for the land that had been in my blood for generations. The fight wasn't going to be easy, but I wasn't about to back down. The first thing I did was take action. I knew the legal battle was going to be long and exhausting. Lawyers were expensive, and I couldn't afford to keep going down that path. So, I decided to fight back the only way I knew how, through strategy, preparation, and sheer determination. I called up Tony Riggs, my old Army buddy at the EPA. He'd been a big help already, but now I needed more than just advice. I needed backup. Tony, being the expert on federal water laws, knew exactly what to do. He told me to get ready because things were about to get much uglier. "You've got an Army Corps dam, Ryan," he reminded me, his voice steady. "That means federal jurisdiction. We're not talking about just zoning laws here. This is about violating federal laws, and we have the evidence to prove it." With Tony's help, I dug deeper. I spent hours at the courthouse, going through every document I could find. Land, deeds, permits, zoning reports. I needed the smoking gun that would tie all of Maggie's illegal activities together. And then I found it. Tucked away in the back of the records, buried under stacks of old paperwork, was the Holy Grail, the original 1978 Army Corps of Engineers dam construction permits. These weren't just any permits. These were federal permits that not only authorized the construction of my grandfather's dam, but also ensured it was built under federal oversight for flood control and watershed management. That meant any local laws, zoning changes, or permits issued by the city council had no power over it. I finally had the leverage I needed, but I also needed to be strategic. I couldn't go to court just yet. Maggie and Rick were too powerful. They had the system rigged in their favor, but I could make them feel the heat. And that's exactly what I did. I began documenting every instance of corruption, every violation of water rights, and every shady deal Maggie and Rick were involved in. I sent in anonymous tips about their dealings to the local news, hoping to get the media involved. I knew the power of public opinion. And Maggie had been so careful with her media campaign, portraying herself as the concerned homeowner, the woman who was just trying to protect her community. It was time to flip the script, but Maggie wasn't backing down. She responded by organizing a safety patrol, 3 HOA board members who parked their golf carts in front of my property, taking pictures of every car that came and went. They filed complaint after complaint about unsightly structures, unapproved, farm equipment, and environmental hazards, all complete fabrications. They sent letters, they called the authorities, and they did everything they could to make my life miserable. It wasn't long before they escalated even further. Rick used his position on the city council to push for an emergency zoning change, this time with the goal of declaring my property a public safety risk. I knew this was just another tactic to pressure me into selling. They thought I'd cave under the pressure, but they had no idea who they were dealing with. I didn't back down. In fact, I doubled down. I knew I needed to gather more evidence. So I started tracking the construction crew's activities. I noticed something strange. They were working long hours, racing to finish the homes as fast as possible. It didn't take a genius to figure out why. They were trying to get the development completed before I could get a legal injunction. As the construction crews kept moving forward, I started to notice something else. They were messing with the natural water flow again. I watched as they dug trenches to reroute the creek, diverting it away from the dam. The water level dropped another inch, then another. It was happening in real time, right in front of my eyes. This wasn't just a few trees being cut down or a few homes being built. This was destruction. They were killing the land, killing the dam, killing everything my grandfather had worked so hard for. That's when I realized that if I didn't act fast, I might lose everything. I had to move quickly, before it was too late. So I made a call to Amanda Cross, a lawyer I'd met through a few contacts at the EPA. Amanda was an environmental attorney who had a reputation for going after corrupt developers and corporations who thought they could get away with environmental destruction. She was the perfect ally. Amanda came on board, and we started strategizing. She helped me craft a legal strategy that would put pressure on the developers and the city council. The first step was simple. I needed to prove that Maggie's development was illegal, that it violated not just local zoning laws, but federal water regulations. That's where Tony's expertise came in. He helped us compile a detailed report on the creek's original path and the impact the diversion had on the surrounding ecosystem. But we couldn't stop there. The next move? A lawsuit. A federal one. Maggie wasn't going to take this sitting down. She responded by spreading more lies about me on social media, calling me everything from a dangerous war veteran to a terrorist. She tried to smear my name at every turn, painting me as a threat to the community. But I didn't care about the lies. I didn't care about the smear campaigns. I cared about one thing and one thing only: getting the water back. I wasn't going to let her steal what wasn't hers, and I wasn't going to let her get away with destroying my grandfather's legacy. I knew it was coming, the showdown. And when it came, Maggie wasn't going to know what hit her. The lawsuit was just the beginning. I had the legal strategy. I had the support. But Maggie was about to play her last card. She wasn't going to let go without a fight. And when she escalated, I was ready. But would my plan be enough to stop her, or would the truth finally rise to the surface? Maggie Fields underestimated one thing: my resolve. She thought she could bully me into submission, that I'd eventually give up and walk away. But as the fight escalated, I realized something crucial. This wasn't just about reclaiming my land or my water rights. It was about making sure the truth came to light. And when the truth comes to light, it has a way of unraveling even the most tightly knit webs of corruption. The stakes were higher now. I was no longer just dealing with a greedy HOA and a corrupt city councilman. I was dealing with people who had manipulated the system for years, people who thought they were untouchable, and now I had the evidence to take them down. The first thing I did was prepare for the legal battle. I knew Maggie and her cronies were going to fight dirty, but I wasn't the type of person to back down just because the odds were stacked against me. I had something they didn't: the truth. And truth, when wielded correctly, is a powerful weapon. With Amanda Cross by my side, we devised a multi-pronged strategy. First, we filed an emergency injunction to stop the development from continuing any further. But I wasn't going to stop there. I knew the water rights issue was the key, and I needed to make it clear that Maggie's entire project was built on lies. I began preparing to unleash the full force of the federal law. Meanwhile, I kept my eyes on the construction site. I knew they were racing against the clock, trying to finish their homes before I could stop them. But I also knew they were making mistakes. They were cutting corners, creating false drainage systems that wouldn't hold up to natural floods, using cheap materials to build these luxury homes. But the worst part was the creek diversion. I could feel the water running out of my grasp day after day. That's when I decided to take a different approach. I had to make them feel the consequences of their actions. I wasn't just going to file a lawsuit and hope for the best. I was going to make them regret ever messing with my family's land. I reached out to the local media. I'd already sent anonymous tips to a few reporters who had covered the HOA's past dealings, and now it was time to take it public. I sent out press releases, coordinated with local activists, and made sure the story of Willowbrook Estate's corruption was on everyone's radar. I knew Maggie couldn't handle the pressure. Her polished image was about to crack. At the same time, I doubled down on the environmental angle. I had the Army Corps of Engineers involved, and I made sure they knew just how critical this situation was. Maggie and Rick had created an environmental disaster by diverting the creek, and I was going to make sure it didn't go unnoticed. With the help of Tony, we gathered evidence proving that the creek diversion wasn't just illegal, it was causing long-term damage to the local ecosystem. It wasn't long before things started to boil over. The media began covering the story in full force. The local news ran a special report on Maggie's involvement in the land grab, and soon, people began to realize that this wasn't just about a few houses being built on some land. This was about a corrupt scheme to profit off the destruction of the environment, and it was happening right under our noses. But Maggie wasn't going down without a fight. She ramped up her smear campaign, using every tactic she could to paint me as the villain. She went to the press again, claiming that I was a dangerous veteran who was obsessed with revenge. She even went as far as organizing a petition to have my property condemned, calling me a public nuisance. She tried to use the media to sway public opinion against me, but all it did was make her look like the villain she truly was. As the battle heated up, I knew it was time to make my move. I'd been holding back, waiting for the right moment to strike. And that moment was now. Armed with the full weight of the evidence, I prepared to take the fight to the courts. Amanda and I filed a federal lawsuit against Maggie, Rick, and the Willowbrook Estates HOA, demanding they halt construction and restore the creek to its original path. We brought in environmental experts to testify about the damage that had been done to the local ecosystem, and we made sure the press was there to cover every single step of the process. It was time for the world to see Maggie Fields for what she really was, a greedy, corrupt developer who didn't care about the community, the land, or the environment, only her own personal gain. The lawsuit wasn't just about legalities. It was about setting a precedent. If I could win this, it wouldn't just be a victory for me. It would be a victory for everyone who had ever been bullied by an HOA, for every small farmer and landowner who had been pushed out by corporate greed. It would be proof that one person, one community, could stand up against the powers that be and win. But as I watched Maggie scramble to cover her tracks, I knew this was far from over. The fight was getting dirty, and Maggie was about to pull out her trump card. I had my plan, and I had the evidence. But would it be enough to stop her? The courtroom battle was just beginning, and I wasn't sure what would happen next. But one thing was certain. The truth was on my side, and it was about to be unleashed in full force. The tension in the air was unbearable as I stood at the courthouse steps, waiting for the hearing to begin. This was it, the moment we'd all been waiting for. I'd spent months preparing, gathering evidence and building alliances. But now, it all came down to this one fight. Maggie Fields had pulled every dirty trick in the book to try and take what wasn't hers, but now she was facing the full weight of the law. And the truth. The courtroom was packed. There were reporters, local activists, and even some of Maggie's neighbors who had come to witness the showdown. Maggie walked in first, her heels clicking on the marble floor with a sharpness that almost felt like a declaration of war. She was all smiles and poise, acting as though nothing was wrong, as if she were still the innocent victim in all this. But the glances from some of the onlookers told a different story. People were starting to see through her act. Rick Fields, her husband, was with her. The city councilman who had pushed through all the shady zoning changes, who had used his political connections to try to bulldoze my family's history, he was with her, and he looked like a man who knew he was about to lose everything. But despite everything stacking against them, they didn't show an ounce of fear. That's the kind of arrogance that can only come from someone who believes they're above the law. I walked into the courtroom with Amanda Cross by my side. I'd never been more confident in my life. This wasn't just about legalities anymore. It was about justice. Justice for my family, justice for the land, and justice for everyone who had been oppressed by people like Maggie and Rick. The proceedings began with opening statements, and I could feel Maggie's eyes burning into me, her perfectly manicured lips still trying to form that fake smile. But I wasn't buying it. I knew the truth, and it was my turn to make sure the world knew it. 2. Amanda spoke first, outlining the evidence we had gathered. The 1923 water rights deed, the 1978 Army Corps permits, the evidence of water diversion, and the destruction of the local ecosystem. Every fact was backed up by hard evidence. Maggie's schemes weren't just illegal, they were damaging to the entire community. Then it was my turn. I stood in front of the judge, feeling the weight of the moment. The room was silent as I began to speak. I didn't need to say much. The truth was all around us. I talked about my grandfather, about the work he'd done, the dam he'd built, and the generations of families who had relied on that water. I spoke about the land, how it wasn't just property. It was a part of who we were. And then I looked at Maggie, who was sitting smugly at the front of the room, and I said, "What you've tried to do isn't just about money. It's about destroying everything my grandfather worked for. It's about erasing the history of this land, and I'm not going to let you do that. Not now. Not ever." The room was still for a moment. You could feel the weight of my words settling over everyone. The judge, a man I knew had a reputation for being fair, looked down at his notes and then up at Maggie. The time for games was over. Maggie's lawyer tried to push back, arguing that I had no right to challenge the zoning changes, that the city had acted in good faith, and that my dam was outdated and a danger to the community. But I was ready. I had the Army Corps of Engineers there, ready to testify that the dam had been inspected and was safe. I had the environmental experts who had shown how the creek diversion had harmed local agriculture and wildlife. I had the people, my neighbors, ready to testify about the long-term damage Maggie's development had caused. As the day dragged on, it became more and more apparent that Maggie's case was falling apart. One by one, her arguments were dismantled, and the truth came to the surface. Her carefully crafted image of a concerned, well-meaning HOA president was beginning to crack. The lies she'd spread in the media were exposed for what they were. Nothing more than a desperate attempt to cover up her illegal actions. Finally, the moment I had been waiting for came. The judge called for a recess to deliberate. I sat in that room, heart pounding, as I waited for the decision that would change everything. I knew Maggie was sweating it. I could see the panic in her eyes. She wasn't as confident now. She knew what was coming. When the judge returned, I could feel the eyes of the entire room on him. He cleared his throat and began to speak. After reviewing all the evidence presented, I find that the actions of the Willowbrook Estates HOA,
led by Mrs. Fields, have been in direct violation of federal and state laws. The diversion of the creek and the construction of homes on Mr. Carson's property were done without proper permits, and I hereby order that all construction be halted.
Immediately, there was a collective gasp in the room. I felt a rush of relief, followed by an overwhelming sense of victory. Maggie's face went white. Rick stood up in shock, muttering something under his breath. The judge continued. Furthermore, I order that the Willowbrook Estates HOA pay for the restoration of the creek and any damages caused to the local ecosystem. The land in question will be returned to its rightful owner, Mr. Ryan Carson. It was over. Maggie had lost. But the real victory came when the judge turned to Rick. "And as for you, Mr. Fields," the judge said, "your actions have not gone unnoticed. I've been made aware of your involvement in pushing through zoning changes without proper public disclosure. This will be referred for further investigation." Rick's face went pale. He looked like he had just realized the consequences of his actions. The walls were closing in on him. The rest of the day was a blur. Maggie and Rick stormed out of the courtroom, but I didn't care. I was already thinking about the next step. The land was mine again. The creek was going to flow freely once more, just like it had for generations. The legacy of my grandfather was safe, and the community had won. This isn't just my victory. It's a victory for anyone who has ever had their land or water rights stolen by a corrupt system. If you've ever fought an HOA, if you've ever been bullied or manipulated by people in power, drop a comment below and let me know your story. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and share this video with anyone who needs to hear it. Let's keep fighting for what's right, because justice isn't just something you wait for, it's something you fight for. And remember, the fight doesn't end here. If you're dealing with an HOA nightmare of your own, keep pushing. The truth has a way of finding its way to the surface, just like water finding its natural flow. You're never alone in this. So if you've made it this far into my story, do me one last favor. Like this video, subscribe to the channel, share it with anyone who's dealt with an HOA nightmare, and drop your story in the comments below. Let's make sure none of us ever feel alone in the fight again.